the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Scientist podcast from Bitesize Bio. If you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist, you're in the right place. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, where we provide bioscience researchers with help for improving their technical skills, their soft skills and their well-being. And in this podcast, we will be focusing on the latter of these three areas. With me, the driving force of this podcast, it's Kenneth Vogt. I have worked with Ken now for over 7 years with him as my business mentor and colleague, and I knew that his expertise could help a lot of researchers, and so we decided to start this podcast. In these sessions, we will hear mostly from Ken on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. And along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. So, over to the man himself. Kenneth, how are things with you today?
Doing great. So today we're going to dig in to the final three-part series, the third three-part series. This one is called How to Discover and Wield Your Charisma Factors. Now you may be looking at this and saying, I was kind of on board with the idea of human needs and mindsets. Yes, I could see how that'd be useful, but charisma in science, in the lab, really? Now, isn't charisma just for politicians and movie stars and rock stars? What does charisma have to do with me? Well, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna make the case for it for you, and then we're gonna show you how to implement it and how it's gonna really help you in your work, in your career, in the lab itself, but in the broader business of what you do too. So let's start off by a definition. What is charisma? Because it may seem like an almost indefinable term. It's some magical thing that some people seem to have and other people seem to not have, and it doesn't seem possible to learn it. Well, first, let's start with the dictionary. The dictionary defines charisma as compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. Wow. Now that sounds like something that would be really important if you were running for office, or if you were trying to make it, big on the music scene, or in some other endeavors. But why here? Do I need to be attractive? Do I need to be charming? Do I need to be inspiring? Do I need devotion from other people? It's like, well, okay, you don't need any of that. That's true. You don't need any of it. However, if you have any of it, if you have more than one piece of that, if you have all of that, it can do amazing things for you. It'll help you to accomplish your objectives. You have a mission in your career, and it might be you have a mission right now. You got a task in front of you that you're working on in the lab, and it's truly important. Well, there's nothing that can be done in science today that can be done alone. You are not an island. You cannot be an island. There might have been a time 200 years ago when somebody could just be a scientist off by themselves. But anymore, the interconnectedness of what's necessary is gigantic. Just start with something as simple as your education. If you had to start from scratch and invent chemistry and invent biology, and how could you have ever got to where you are today? And you're standing on the shoulders of giants, because without that, none of this would be possible. The advancement of science has happened because people work together. And if you want people to work with you and help you, and you need them to do so, you're going to need some charisma. Because charisma is going to give them the incentive to join in and help you. Now, you may think that, well, there are other incentives out there. It could be something as simple as, they too are getting a paycheck. But that doesn't mean they will help you on what you're doing. It means they'll do their job next to you. But to help you, you're going to need something about you that can compel other people to join you in this. So just like we talked about human needs, just like we talked about mindsets, I've got a set of 6 charisma factors in mind. They will cover 95% of the cases. Again, it's a framework. It's not reality, but it's a method that works. And
Kenneth, before we carry on and going into these factors, I think in respect to defining whether charisma is a thing that's worth inquiring within yourself about whether it's a thing that you should have. Mm-hmm. If you look at it the other way around, if you have a boss that you have been devoted to, for example, then how much better was your work compared with to a boss that you were not devoted to, that you kind of resented working for? It's like night and day in terms of output and in terms of enjoyment for the boss and the employee or the group member. And as you said, the dictionary definition there is compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. And so it's quite easy to take that as a kind of, really a huge thing. But actually, if you look at what devotion means, it just means, the definition is a feeling of strong love or loyalty. And so it's just, charisma is something that just inspires loyalty in other people. That's one way to look at it. And of course you would want that, because you want people, as you go up the ladder, you want people to want to work with you because they feel something other than just a transactional willingness to work with you. That it's something above that, because you will have experienced it yourself that is a much, if you're loyal to someone, you feel that loyalty, then it will be a much better, it will give much better results.
Right. I think you bring up a really good point too, that even if you as an individual don't feel like you are particularly charismatic, you've likely been moved by somebody yourself. You felt their charisma. And sometimes they're not the people you might think. There might be that amazing professor that has been a change agent in the world, and you've really looked up to them, and you found them charismatic. But you know what? Grandma might be charismatic. Why are you so devoted to Grandma? It's because of charisma. And you think it's not just because she makes good cookies. There's something about her that makes you want to do for her, that makes you want to please her, that makes you want to do what she asks. And the same thing is true for you. You can do the same thing. You can be a grandma.
Yeah, I think what you're about to touch on as well in this episode is that there is a commonly held definition of charisma, and that is not the full scope of what charisma is, or the possible ways to be charismatic.
Exactly. And that's it. I mean, right now charismatic you may have a notion. Yeah, you may have a notion in mind for what charisma is, but here's the problem. Charisma is just a raw power. It has to be, you have to apply ethics to it. Because here's the thing. There are charismatic people out there that are downright evil. And what do they use charisma for? They use it for manipulation.
Yeah, and that's what my own, before we talked about this initially, my own understanding of charisma was that it was something, to use the core mindsets we talked about previously. It's a very orange thing, perhaps, mm-hmm. or maybe even red, and it's someone who is charming to get something out of you, and I think that's a commonly held perception of what charisma is, that it's a bit edgy, it's a bit kind of double-edged sword, and it's about manipulative charm. But again, I think what we'll be looking at here is that it's not that, and it's possible to be yourself and be charismatic, more than possible, and get the results that charisma brings.
So to be fair, you can't say it's not that. It can be that. It's just, it doesn't have to be that. It's not automatically evil. Let's put it that way. Generally speaking, what it's automatically is neutral. and that is it's somebody who's persuasive. That could be good or bad, but being persuasive is certainly useful. So even if you were only neutral about it, having some charisma that would allow you to persuade people to your way of thinking, or to support the things that you're doing, or to grease the wheels for what you're doing, that's a useful thing. But you can take it at an even higher level, and if you apply some really positive ethics to it and really make it good, well, now you're being an inspiration. And that's a word that came from that original definition that I covered earlier. But to be inspiring to other people, that is a really high aspiration, and it's really something powerful. So at first blush, you may look at it and say, well, that's kind of out of my pay grade. I don't know if I can be inspiring. But don't cut yourself off from possibility. There, you may be surprised how inspiring you can be. And part of the problem that you're probably having is your notion of what charisma is only fits into certain categories. And you may feel like those categories aren't a good fit for you. And that might well be true. But there are other categories that you may not normally think of as being about charisma. And those are the things that we'll cover in the rest of this series. For our session today, though, I just want to talk to you about charisma and talk to you about how it can be surprising that it's useful to you. And we're going to use an example here, and we're going to put Nick on the spot.
Yep.
Because Nick is he's a PhD scientist like you. He's been in the lab, been at the bench, did the whole thing. But he has an alter ego. He has something he does as an avocation. And it ties in very neatly to this little conversation about charisma. And that is, Nick is the lead singer in a Bon Jovi tribute band. And if you're going to believe the press for the band called Just Jovi, they are the premier Bon Jovi tribute band in Scotland. And I've heard them. They're good. And you can imagine, it's not just that Nick plays a rock star at night. He plays one of the great rock stars at night, John Bon Jovi. So, Nick, in reference to charisma, how is it that a selfie-facing, nerdy scientist can get up on stage and play the rock star?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know. No, I do. Well, certainly not. I mean, I've always been interested in music, so it's something I've always wanted to do, but I always kind of stayed, I was always the lead singer in bands, but it was kind of on my terms and so on. This thing came up a few years ago, and I thought, when I first saw it, I thought, who'd be crazy enough to do that? That's a really hard idea, a hard gig. It's hard to play someone like that on stage, and in effect, it's like playing in a play, being in a play, not playing in a band. And because I'm acting, but I had no previous experience of that. But I just felt like I should go for it because it looked like a growth opportunity. It looked like something really difficult, but actually something that I felt that I could pull off. And if you look back to me as a kid or even a young adult and stuff, there's no way. I'm not what you would call a classically charismatic. I don't have that twinkle in my eye type thing. I'm not that sort of person. But what I do have is how would I put this? I think this is what you'll be touching on later, Ken. But the way to be charismatic is to be yourself, or is to tap into what you're really passionate about. And what I'm really passionate about is delivering for people, is making something making something that will really inspire people, or people will really enjoy. And so the way that it works for me, the way that I'm, pardon the dogs, the way that I'm able to do that and to pull that off is that I'm not being myself. I'm being someone else. I'm playing a part that that these people are really loyal fans of, the people who come to watch us. And if I can pour myself into that and be that person, then it works for them, and so that works for me.
So, Nick, you uncovered a few things here, and I want to put some labels on them so people can see what it is that you brought to the table that allowed you to do this? Because at first blush, you're using an artifice, as it were, and saying that, oh, I'm just play acting at this. And that's how you gave yourself permission to act charismatically. And anybody can do that. In any situation, you can look at this and say, okay, I'm going to channel somebody else that I know that's really, really persuasive and really inspiring. And you can do that. But here are the factors you have to bring to do that. There are 3 things: presence, power, and warmth. So, when we talk about the idea of being present, what does that mean? It means you get right here, right now. That it seems like presence would be such a complicated thing, but it's just not. We're always off in our own little worlds, and we're always daydreaming about this, that, the other thing, and we're always thinking about what comes next. We're always having anxiety about what happened before. If you can just be right here, right now, this is the moment I've got. This is the only moment I can control. The past already happened. There's nothing to be done about that. The future hasn't happened yet, so there's nothing I can do about that yet. But now is the moment I've got when I can do something. And so if you're here and now, people notice that. And they're looking for that. We all would like to see some stability out there. And when you see somebody who's firmly grounded, we're drawn to that. And that's part of the thing about charisma. Charisma isn't about controlling other people. It's about drawing them. It's about bringing them in to this space that looks like it's a good space to be. Maybe it's good in that it's safe. Maybe it's good in that it feels like something's going to happen here. So that's the first thing you have to do is you got to get yourself present. Now, part of what gets in your way there sometimes is that you're not physically comfortable. And it can be the silliest things. Are your clothes comfortable? Are your shoes comfortable? Is your chair comfortable? The equipment you're using, is it broke down and not adequate to your needs? Have you not gathered together the things that you need to do what you need to do right now? Get your physical space in order. Get anything that's impacting you, your physical self, in order, so that you don't have this distracting additional stress out there.
So you're talking here about how people can be more present in themselves by just removing anything that's taking their focus away? Is that
exactly? And sometimes we look at this and say, hey, I just don't care. I'm not a slave to fashion. I'm just not gonna waste any time on that. It's not important to me. Is that true? Or are you telling yourself a story that it's not important to you? Would you, in fact, feel more comfortable if you were wearing clothes that fit better, or a little more stylish, or a little more comfortable? Is it maybe worth spending an extra $20 on that pair of shoes to get shoes that actually feel good on your feet? Is it actually worth spending another $50 on that jacket because it just looks better on you? I'm not talking about moving toward vanity, but I am talking about we got to stop doing things to ourselves that we're making ourselves uncomfortable. Because when you're uncomfortable, you're going to radiate that to other people. But when you're comfortable, you'll also radiate that to other people, and people like to be comfortable. And so you will have a certain magnetic quality to you when you're more comfortable in your own skin. Now, obviously, you can only go so far with this. Now, I've seen videos of Nick's band, and yes, he does dress like he's there for a rock show, but he doesn't dress like he's in a hair band. He's not pushing it so far that it's unnatural for him. But I have seen him up there in a Superman t-shirt, and I think that's great.
It's worth, actually, in that note, it's probably worth noting that what I've done because I've been doing this for 3 years or so now, and what I've used it as is an exercise to get more comfortable keep pushing the boundary of what's comfortable, and so that I can stay focused. I'm not feeling so uncomfortable that I can't focus on the show, and so where I was 3 years ago, let's say the first show we did, I'm prepared to go much further now, and still feel comfortable and still feel focused than I was in the beginning. It's just that exercise of lifting that further and further. But also I would say I'm far from feeling 100% comfortable on stage. I just kind of probably am better at, I'm just less uncomfortable, if you like.
Right. Well, that really makes a good point there, that you don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to be world class at it. You just got to be a little better than you've been. Just take it up a notch and go to the next level. And you'll find that after you go to the next level, well, then that'll feel normal and comfortable. And you'll be willing to go to the next level. And you'll be willing to go to the next level. It'll keep progressing for you. And there was a point, and I've known Nick through this whole process with this particular band, and I know what he was like when he first said, "I'm thinking of joining a band. Am I crazy?" And to, okay, we're doing it. Man, we suck. And then it was like, we got a show. I'm terrified. And it just kept going along. And now none of those things of the past seem ridiculous. They seem silly. But it was because he bothered to keep working on the charisma of his presence there in a band. And the same thing can be applied in anything you're doing. I promise you that what you need to do in the lab is small compared to what you need to do to get on stage and rock the house. So it's definitely within your grasp. It's something you can do. So another thing about presence is we're constantly being distracted by stuff. And devices, especially our phones and our tablets that are always ringing and going off and buzzing and vibrating and all these things going on. Well, if you're in a situation where you need others to come along with you, you need their help and assistance, and you need to inspire them, turn the devices off, turn the services off, do whatever you got to do. At the beginning of this particular podcast, when Nick and I were talking before we started, he said, "Oh, give me a minute. I need to tell someone I'm turning off Skype." That's exactly what he should do right now. He's here to make an impression on you, and he doesn't want to be distracted. So, that's the kind of thing that you've got to be aware of. And the excuse that we often use on this stuff is like, "Well, I can't be unavailable." Like, oh, yes, you can. You can be unavailable for this 5-minute conversation, this half-hour presentation, this 2-hour meeting. You can. The world is not going to end because you, so important to you, were unavailable for 2 hours. You can do this.
Yeah, I think it's a good point as well to make that it's not just about being. There's more ways to be unavailable than just than just being buried in your device. Because I know that during my PhD, for example, the currency and I think I've mentioned this before, but the kind of the way you showed in the place that I worked for my PhD, that you cared and that you were really diligent and you were committed, was that you worried all the time, right? Or at least that's how I interpret it. So that I was going home on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and I would still be worrying about whether this experiment was going to work, are things going well, am I good enough, all that stuff. And then one Friday I actually went to a yoga class with my wife, and she wanted to take me along, so I went along, and the woman said, "Okay, now relax and just forget everything." And my brain said, "Well, hang on, you can't forget everything, you've got all this stuff to worry about." And then I just realised what I was doing, and for that moment I had this little moment of insight of, hang on, I can just let that go. It's not my job to hold on to this all of the time. But by holding on to it all the time, I was less available. And I'm not saying I've cracked it. I still do that to an extent now. But it's one of those things. You just keep working at it to get to become more and more available.
Right. Sure, and the problem is we built up all these stories that, we tell ourselves the story that worrying evidences how much I care. Well, deconstruct that. It's like, is that actually the truth? Or is that just something that I've found convenient to believe?
Yeah, or is worrying what's keeping me, motivated? It's keeping me from moving and stopping the wheels from falling off is another one, I think.
Right. Yeah, and considering the world without worry, if I didn't worry, what would the world look like? What would happen then? Oftentimes it's because you've never considered that. It's like, I can't consider that. Oh, no, it doesn't hurt to consider it. Maybe you think you can't do it, but first let's consider it. And you may find in your consideration that things are not the way you were presuming they were. So we've talked about a number of different ways that your presence can be impacted. Now let's talk about power. Power, again, you gotta apply some ethics to this thing. Power can be used very manipulatively, but it also can be very inspirational. So think about some simple, powerful things that you could do that would be inspiring to other people. Well, I'll give you a simple example. Look somebody in the eye when you're talking to them. Now, I don't mean give them a death stare, but we all know the difference of, am I looking them in the eye or am I avoiding eye contact? And we know it's uncomfortable for us when somebody is avoiding eye contact with us. And they feel weak to us. They feel when somebody is avoiding eye contact with us, we feel their weakness, and we might even be empathetic about it, but it's not inspiring at all. Whereas somebody that will look you in the eye, not in an aggressive way, but in a way where you feel attached to them, you feel connected. All right, that is very powerful. Now all of a sudden they're giving you their full attention. Now they're going to hear everything you say. Now they're going to pay attention to the things you ask them to pay attention to. So, bring that part of the power to it. The flip side, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, to go back to the band, how does that work in my band scenario? Is, again, all I've done here is I've put in some very simple things to appear powerful, and that is enough. And it's very simple things like paying attention to the way that I stand on the stage, and the way that if anyone makes eye contact with me, I will make eye contact with them. Not that I'm 100% confident about that, but that's what I chose to do. If anyone takes a photograph, I always look at the camera. If anyone's videoing, I always sing right to the camera, and it makes people feel like you're connecting with them, even though inside it doesn't make people feel like you're connecting them. It gives people something to connect to, even though inside you don't 100% feel that, if you know what I mean. But I just made the conscious choice to put these kind of pillars in place that would make me look increasingly powerful and present, regardless of how I felt.
Right. And it points out, too, that you can do this with a crowd. One-on-one, obviously, it seems obvious to look somebody in the eye, but what happens when it's a crowd of people? What if it's a meeting room full of people? Well, make eye contact individually with people. And no, you don't have to make eye contact with every single person in the room, but you're going to notice the moments. There are some people that you've definitely captured their attention. Give them that gift. Look them in the eye. There are some other people in the room you need their buy-in. Give them attention. Make sure you look those folks in the eye. There are going to be people in the room who are skeptical to you. And again, this is a power thing. Look them in the eye and let them know that I am willing to stand for my position that you are skeptical about. So give me a chance to make my case. It's not a matter of challenging them so much as showing them that, look, I am not afraid to address any detractors or or I'm not afraid to address any questions that people may have about this.
Yeah, if you read about, it's often good to go cross-disciplinary when you're trying to figure out how to do your job better. And if you look at what professional singers say about how they work a room, if you read some, then they'll talk about focusing on one area of the room to focusing their energy on one area of the room to draw them in, and then focusing on the other area. the next area, and so then you can keep kind of like a, it's quite sounds a bit whimsical, but they're drawing people towards them all the time by just putting focus on different areas or different individuals to just try and influence. Obviously, it depends on the crowd, to try and draw everyone in or give everyone a chance to be drawn in. But it's the same when you're giving a presentation. It's or a lab meeting or a bigger auditorium presentation. The more you can you see people who kind of mechanically look around the room, but the more you genuinely try to connect with the people that are in the audience, the better that feels for them, and the more likely they will have a good perception of what you've just done, regardless of what you said.
Exactly. And that we've all seen people do that. They just kind of robotically just kind of scan the audience, whether that's in an auditorium or in a small meeting. And what's really noticeable about that is that they're not making connection to anybody. They're avoiding focusing on anybody. That's what the scanning thing is all about. So don't do that. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about on this podcast, my answer to many problems that people are, what do I do different? Well, it's easy. Don't do that. Stop doing that thing that doesn't work. And scanning the audience is one of those things. So now if you're going to truly be charismatic, it's going to have to be a two-way street. So in addition to looking people in the eye so that they'll pay attention to you, you have to pay attention to other people. You have to actually listen to other people. And you've got to give evidence that you're listening. And often that evidence is something as simple as nodding. That you're acknowledging, I hear that you're saying something. It's not about agreement with what they're saying, because you may entirely disagree with what they're saying. But what's really important is that you're hearing it. And from the other person's standpoint, especially if they know they're saying something that is opposite of what you've said, acknowledging that I have heard you lodge your disagreement, or maybe even your disapproval, is really powerful. And again, it adds to your power position. So you might think that if I'm going to be powerful, I've got to pretend away all of the naysayers. Like, no, exactly the opposite. You have to embrace them. You have to draw them in. That yes, I am well aware of the weaknesses or the points against what I'm making. Well, now that's a much stronger position. If you can't acknowledge the weaknesses or the detractors from whatever it is that you are promoting, you're not going to get very far. So this is the more powerful stance to take. And I think about the Godfather movie. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that's all it is. It's when I say enemies, I'm using that word in air quotes. The people that are not on the same side with you yet. You got to keep them close. You need to hear from people that are recognizing where the chinks in your armor are, because that's how you will strengthen yourself. Now, another thing that evidences that you're listening to people is to ask them questions, clarifying questions. So you just said that thus and so. Does that mean X, Y, Z? Get them talking about their side. And again, it actually disengages their power, because now we're saying, well, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of what you're saying. Let's look at it in all its glory and see if it stands up. So obviously you have to have your ducks in a row when you do that. Or, there are going to be cases where you have charismatically gone in to get something and you run up against some serious opposition, and as you listen to the opposition, you realize, I need to go back to the drawing board. So it's okay. Go back to the drawing board. Sometimes caution is the better part of valor. Now is not the time. So, but this is how you find out. And this is how you'll be able to come back in a stronger position later. So the third, now we've mentioned presence, we've mentioned power. The third thing is warmth. warmth. And you think, man, what does warmth have to do in this technical setting of what I'm doing now? Well, it may not have anything to do with the topic itself, but it does have to do with the people. That is, there's still people having to do their jobs here, and in some cases, you're asking them to do a lot. Maybe you need a lot from that person or that group of people if your mission is going to be fulfilled. Well, you got to be warm with them. They got to feel some fellow feeling. They have to recognize in you that I understand this is a big ask, but it's worth it. And here's why it's worth it. And here's how we're all going to win. And here's why we care. That notion of caring and compassion and empathy that sound like they're so unnecessary in a scientific setting. Well, they are necessary because the scientific setting always has scientists, and scientists are always human beings. And human beings need that stuff.
Yeah. And if you go back to the earlier example about, okay, so how do current or previous bosses that you've had or seen in operation, how do they stack up there? And in some cases, like in any profession, you can have bosses there that don't have compassion. And then so they don't care about how so much about how how they set things up, how that affects the student. The classic joke about just working the PhD students hard, for example, and how much different would that be if it was done with compassion? It's not that a PhD isn't hard work, of course it is, but if you have empathy about the fact that it is, and don't just expect it to, don't just expect it because you say, as the boss, then that's a huge, it's a huge difference in the loyalty you would have from your PhD students, for example, and then it's a huge difference in the experience for both of you, for the student and the supervisor.
Right. So you can imagine, you really, in your life, lots of charismatic people, and not just in the stereotypical places you'd expect to find them. You do know people in the lab and in the university and in the company that are charismatic. Some of them are so charismatic you may look at that and say, to have them as a role model is almost to set too high a bar. But okay, fine. You have other people that are mildly charismatic or modestly charismatic. Watch those people. What are they doing that you don't do? What is it they're willing to do that you aren't? In some cases, it may be the simple thing is like what we were talking about earlier, being willing to listen to distractors. Or maybe it's they bother to set up what they say first, that they begin with praise, for instance, before they ask somebody to do something. And I don't just mean in a manipulative way. I mean they're legitimate praise. And you'll start to see that actually you've got plenty of examples of charisma being used all around you all the time. So this is your opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to join that crowd. And I would recommend that you do it with good ethics. I think you get better results that way. And that's not to say that there aren't people that aren't evil geniuses. It's true. But is that what you want to be remembered as? Or would you rather just be remembered as a genius? And without charisma, it's a little hard. No one knows. No one knows about your genius if you're not being charismatic about it. So it's something that's worth reaching into. So, just as we've talked about some other things in the past, where we had six things you could use, there are 6 charisma factors, and we're going to dig into them in the next 2 sessions. We'll cover 3 of them in each session. And I promise you that some of them will be ones that you would have never thought of as charisma. And you may be shocked to think, well, I've got that already. So I'm just going to point it out to you so you can use it. And we'll also talk about, well, how can you make them better? Here's a factor. Is there a way for me to amp up my ability with that factor? So just some things that you can bring to it.
Yeah, I remember the first time you introduced these to me, and you pointed out what my main way to express charisma was, and I remember thinking, well, that's great because that's easy, because that's me, and it doesn't feel like you're asking me to do something that, or you're saying that I would need to project charisma. I would need to do something that's not natural to me, which was quite a relief.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You're going to hear some things here that are going to be real natural for you. Some of you are going to hear a bunch. You're going to go, I can do that and that and that and that. And that's great. For others, there'll be one that stands out for you, and it's enough. So, So, Nick, you have something in mind here, maybe be a good wrap up there for just some bullet points that people can implement?
Well, I mean, it's quite a kind of cliche, I suppose, to say that the best way to be charismatic and to influence people is to be yourself. I guess that, is to increase your presence, power and warmth by being yourself. And I guess that what we'll be talking about in the next 2 episodes is exactly how to do that. Is what switches can you use there, or what can you turn up that you're already doing that will allow you to project those things while still being yourself. And I think you'll be amazed at the results you get from it.
Cool.
So until the next time, I think we'll leave it at that. Actually, I have to mention one thing, and that is the Facebook page. If I've not managed to convince you already that you should join the Happy Scientist Facebook page, then this is another opportunity for you to do so. We'll be discussing charisma factors, core mindsets, and a whole lot more inside the Happy Scientist Club Facebook page, which you can find at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Club. And you can ask us for access, and we will give it to you. So I hope to see you in there. So I think we'll wrap it for today, and we will see you in the next episode.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.